Hey everybody, this is Brian, and this is episode 3 of the Divorce Survival Guide, What to Do During the Marriage. Now, if you skipped the last episode, I'm going to recap it for you very, very quickly. What you do or don't do before a marriage will drastically impact how your divorce proceedings go in court. The same is true as during the marriage. How you act during the marriage is going to really impact how your divorce goes. And we're going to cover some things here. Mainly, we're going to cover, I have to look at my notes. I always got to check the notes. We got to act accordingly. We're going to talk about finances, and this is not financial advice. I am not a financial advisor in any way, shape, or form, and this is not legal advice. And we're going to talk about post-nuptial agreements. Now, you may be going, what is a post-nuptial agreement? We're going to cover it in detail. So, first things first, act accordingly. This is kind of, what did they teach us in school? The golden rule, treat others as you want to be treated. Don't lie, don't cheat. Don't be just a general dirtbag, and try to be the best version of yourself that you can. Not just for yourself, but for your spouse and your family and everyone you care about. You'd be surprised how many people get into a relationship, they get comfortable, and then suddenly they just don't care, and they just start treating their spouse like crap. It happens a lot. We have to cover don't lie. You don't want to lie because you will get caught. Anything that you do, you will get caught in divorce court. I promise you this. Ladies, I'm sorry, this is really common for you. And it's common because you'll get with a guy that wants to control you and limit your money, and you'll open like a secret bank account to get away from him. Yeah, guess what? During the divorce, you're going to go through what's called a discovery process. Part of that process is both lawyers are going to literally discover everything you own. And if you're not open and honest about it, they will find it. And trust me, they will find it. And when they find it, you're probably going to lose it, or you're going to lose most of it. And now your morals are going to be called into question in the middle of court. The judge will not take kindly to you at all. And I'm going to just level with you right up front. When you get to the divorce phase, most of it's about money. The judge really doesn't care who did what to who. It's about money. This is not a criminal proceeding. This is a financial split. You got to remember, modern marriage is a contract. Now, that brings me to the next point. Don't cheat. I sound even dumb having to say this, but stay faithful to your spouse. I mean, no matter how bad it is, stay faithful. If it's that bad, then end the marriage. Go through that painful part called divorce, but just stay faithful. The reason why you don't cheat is very simple. Beyond being ethically unsound, it will decimate you financially. And what I mean by that is the laws are nuts, and you can get into some real trouble, and I'm not even kidding. You can get into some real, almost jail time trouble. But at the same time, a lot of these laws are one-sided and they're not enforceable. So when you actually get to a divorce court, again, it's about money, and it doesn't matter who's finger pointing at who, saying who cheated on who. The judge just simply doesn't care. But it's going to be in the back of the judge's mind. And if the judge is the one that makes the decision, guess what? The judge will not be in your favor because it's going to be in the back of the judge's mind. Now, usually, I'm just going to say it, infidelity is not even taken into consideration in most divorce courts. They just simply don't care. It's about money. But you just want to make sure that you stay honest, loyal, and as faithful as possible, because those things can be used against you in court. And try to have open and honest communication. I can't tell you the number of times, I've in previous relationships tried to talk to somebody, and you can kind of feel that dance you do when you're like, hey, I feel this way, and they're kind of dancing around the issue and they don't want to engage it. And you need to have those painful conversations, or your marriage is going to end, and it'll end badly. You have to have the expectation up front over, what you own, what they own, what you both own jointly, and just have that known right up front. And have the expectations of what your boundaries are. I mean, that's kind of the final point on how to act, is have healthy boundaries and respect their boundaries. If they don't like you leaving the toilet seat up, as dumb as that sounds, just don't leave the toilet seat up. It's not worth the aggravation. And there's other boundaries as well, like ignoring your partner for your cell phone. I've been there. That is like the worst thing to do to somebody, is to tell them that this little electronic device is more important to them than you are, and your spouse. And it's like, yeah, don't do crap like that, because that's how people lose interest. And that's how a lot of divorces actually begin, is People feel slighted, or they feel disrespected, or they feel ignored. We're going to talk about a lot of books through this course, and there's a couple books that really touch home here. One of them, for example, is The 7 Principles for Making a Marriage Work by John Gottman. Read that book. Read it cover to cover. Read it a dozen times. It will save your marriage most of the time. And if your marriage is not savable, it's going to be very obvious when you read that book. Let's talk finances. Now, this is going to be a painful conversation. You might not want to hear what I have to say, but marriage, modern marriage, is a contract. And it is a contract that involves your finances. And once you get married, your finances are not your finances anymore. The way it works, before marriage, you have what's called a premarital asset. Anything you buy or acquire is a premarital asset. Once you're married, it's called a marital asset. So that paycheck you bring home, that's a marital asset. The new car you just bought while you're married, that's a marital asset. The inheritance you just got, that could become a marital asset. You have to be very careful. Now, one thing we're really going to touch on and hammer home here is do not commingle finances. Do not, under any circumstances, commingle finances. Once you commingle those finances, they become marital property. And I'll give you an example. Let's say your grandmother died and you had an inheritance, and that inheritance is in a bank account. Then you go get married. But during the course of the marriage, you're like, you know what? I want to pull some of that money out of that account and go buy a car. That car is now a marital asset. And the opposite is true. If you have that account, that premarital asset, and you put money into it, that account is now a marital asset, and your spouse can go after part of that. One thing people get into trouble with is homes, for example. I own a home. The furnace needed to be repaired, and she graciously offered to help with the repairs. I'm going to level with you. My marriage wasn't going good, so I knew if I let her repair the furnace, she'd own part of the house. She would have equity into the house, and that would mean during the divorce, I would have to pay her out. It sounds bad. It sounds really bad when you put it into that context, almost like during your marriage, you're planning for your divorce. But don't look at it that way. Look at it as protecting your assets. Now, I'm not telling you to not go buy things. Quite the opposite. Go buy a home. Go buy a car. Go do whatever you want to do. Live the best life with your spouse that you possibly can. Go get that giant boat you've both been wanting, or that sports car you both want to ride around in. But just know that when you do that, it is now a marital asset. You both jointly own it. The laws get weird. And again, this is not legal or financial advice, but the laws get really weird. So for example, I'm in Michigan. If your spouse in Michigan buys a car, it is their car, but it is also a marital asset. It makes no sense the way this works. So if your spouse just doesn't make their car payment, that company is going to come after you. Doesn't mean they can actually win that in court because you didn't sign the document, but they're going to try and come after you. And likewise, if you own a vehicle and your spouse just says, you know what, I'm taking it, and drives off the driveway, there's nothing you can do about it. It's a marital asset. They can do whatever they want with it. So you got to be a little careful there. One thing you really want to bear in mind is that if you followed the directions from the first video, you have an LLC, a limited liability company. If you have that, great. But understand that once you have that LLC, if you take a marital asset and transfer that into the LLC, that LLC now becomes a marital asset and they can go after part of that business. So that's what I mean by if you started an LLC before you're married, you want to keep those separated. Do not, under any circumstances, commingle your finances. You just don't do it. Now, there is a way around this, and I want to be very careful about what I say and how I say it. It's called a post-nuptial agreement. I'm going to repeat that. It is a post-nuptial agreement. It's the same thing as a prenuptial agreement, but you sign it after you're married. Typically, you would do something like this if your marriage is not going good and you're considering a divorce, or if you do start a business during the marriage, or if you get some large sum of money or hit the jackpot or something. Now, there's a lot of reasons why you would do it, but I'm going to recap from the first video. Get a lawyer. You want a lawyer, do not do this on your own. You want a lawyer because there's so many legal loopholes that their lawyer could get through in the event of a divorce. And it could go the opposite way too. You could accidentally take everything they own if you don't do it correctly, and you don't want to damage your spouse like that. An ideal divorce is that you both walk away with what you're owed. Now, the problem comes in with the definition of what are you owed and what are they owed, because everyone's going to have a different definition of that. The internet's probably full of stories of people that say, I really do deserve the house and the car and the bank account and everything. But do they really? It's a good question. That's why courtrooms exist. So a postnuptial agreement is essentially the same thing as a prenup, but you sign it after you're married. There's some key things that have to be in there. First off, it has to be understandable for both of you. So same thing as a prenup. If English is not their first language, your lawyer is going to attach a document in their native language and attach it right to the postnup, and you're both going to sign both copies. That way in court they can't go, I didn't understand what I was signing. It's also going to have a clause, I think it's called a nullification clause. So if their lawyer says, oh yeah, there's a problem right here on page 4, we're going to invalidate this whole document, the judge will take that whole postnup and just throw it in the trash. But if you have that clause in there that says if one part of this document is nullifiable or can be withdrawn, that the rest of the document still stands. So they can't go, oh yeah, paragraph 4, page 6, there's a comma out of place, the document's invalid. Nope, they can't do that. And the same rules apply with a prenup in a postnup, which is you can't break the law or circumvent a law in a postnuptial agreement. So you can't say, I will never pay child support. You can't do that. Child support is an actual state law depending on the state you live in. Getting a postnuptial agreement can be a painful process. Your spouse may not want one, and this is where you're going to see some true colors come out. As an example, let's say you started a business while you're married. Well, that business is now a marital asset. You jointly own that. For example, my spouse, she had started an LLC during COVID and was working from home, and whether she knew it or not, I jointly own that LLC. Even though I wanted no part of it, I jointly own that because it was made during the marriage. My LLC that I made before the marriage was a premarital asset, and I was very careful not to commingle finances into it. So mine was pretty much safe. Notice I said pretty much safe. Anything that you make during the marriage is a marital asset. Let that sink in. So in this example, let's say you make an LLC during the marriage. You make a business, a small business doing, I don't know, let's just randomly pick something. You want to be a gardener and weed people's gardens or something. You're not making a ton of money. You're just making enough you can go out and have fun. Well, they now own part of that business. And let's say that business starts taking off. They're going to own part of that business for the rest of that business's existence, years, decades after you're divorced. So you're going to sit down and say, hey, I want a postnuptial agreement, and I want to put my business that I started in this postnuptial agreement. If they don't agree with that, there's not a whole lot you can do about it. But once they sign that postnuptial agreement, it's pretty much ironclad. I say pretty much because honestly, the judge, if it's unfair, can throw it out. The judge will take a prenup and a postnup and review them and see if it's fair and equitable. And if it's not, the judge is going to throw it. Now, you also have to be careful not to invalidate your own prenup or postnup. And what I mean by that is, let's say you own a house and the house is a premarital asset. But during the course of the marriage, you let them put a new roof on the house or something like that. Just out of the kindness of their heart, they want to put a new roof on it. Or you jointly do it. Well, whether you like it or not, you've now invalidated that if the verbiage in your postnup or prenup is not correct. The verbiage needs to be done by a lawyer for those very specific reasons, because you can invalidate your assets. All right, quick recap before we move on. Act accordingly. Watch your finances. Don't commingle anything. If you don't have a prenup, go get a postnuptial agreement and make sure it's done by a lawyer. You want it done by a lawyer because there are so many loopholes in the law. It is ridiculous. So we're going to talk about a pretty touchy subject here, infidelity. And I'd appreciate it if the comments stayed mature because this is a mature topic. When you're married, you're in love, right? You're deeply in love with that person. And, well, love is awesome. The problem with love is that it comes with the expectation that both people are going to be honest and faithful. And infidelity is a real thing. And the problem with divorce is that it takes a long time. I mean, the average divorce can take anywhere from 3 months, 6 months to a year. I mean, if you have children, it can take longer than a year. And during the course of that divorce, you are still legally married, and there are laws against infidelity. This is where you have to be very, very careful. Anything you do on the public internet or out in public in general, you have no warranty or guarantee or expectation of privacy of any kind. So everything you do in the public eye, especially on the internet, can and will be used against you in a court of law. A lot of times what happens is when you go to get a divorce, that divorce process can take a long time and people get lonely, right? Usually what happens is one person will have a boyfriend or girlfriend before the marriage is actually officially over. You've got to be very, very careful though. When you're out in public, anything you do will be discovered. You have no reasonable expectation of privacy when you're in public or on the internet. It's in public. And it happens all the time, and there's nothing you can do about it. But it can be used against you if you do it. And I'm going to give you a real world example here. We're going to talk about the law, and the law is weird, especially in Michigan. I have to use my notes here. So, Michigan law, section 750.30, adultery and punishment, created in 1931. 1931. Punishment, any person who shall commit adultery shall be guilty of a felony. A felony, that's like stealing a car. And when the crime is committed between a married woman and a man who's unmarried, the man shall also be guilty of adultery and liable of the same punishment. Guys, I'm telling you right now, you have to be very careful. I'm here in Michigan, that law is in effect. Whatever your spouse does, there's nothing you can do about it. And whatever you do can be used against you. And for a man, you don't even have to be married to be guilty of this crime. If you're just a single guy in a bar and you see some chick and you're talking and one thing leads to another, you know what I'm talking about. You're going to be guilty of a felony. And there's nothing you can do about that. Even if she didn't tell you that she was married beforehand, you're now a felon. Let's be realistic though. There's not a judge on the planet that's going to enforce that law. Are you kidding me? The entire state of Michigan would be in jail. But that can still be used against you in a court of law. I was told very bluntly, and I mean very bluntly, as a man, that law exists, and do not do anything that could be construed or perceived as a love or sexual relationship or any relationship of any kind. I was even told by close friends, don't even have dinner or lunch with female friends that I have known for decades, because the wrong person sees you in a restaurant with a woman, and guess what? You lose your house. I'm taking that to an extreme. And guess what? Finger pointing starts, so-and-so has a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and once you get to the judge simply doesn't care. But if it gets to the judge and the judge gets to make the decisions, like you just can't agree during mediation, then the judge is going to be looking at what are the circumstances and what's fair. So let's say you're a guy and you have 3 kids and you step out on your wife. Guess what? You just lost your house, you probably lost your car and a good chunk of your income, because the judge is going to take all that into account. You can go eat mac and cheese with your new girlfriend and not have any money, while your wife, former wife, is now spending everything. You got to be really careful out there. The laws are nuts. And that law that I talked about in Michigan is not everywhere. So for example, I think I looked up a couple in New York, California, Florida. That law doesn't exist, but I think there was a couple out there that it did exist. This is why you want to talk to a lawyer. When you're even remotely considering divorce, and we're going to have a whole section on considering divorce, you're going to want to understand the laws in your state, because crazy things are out there like that law in Michigan where you're a felon if you cheat on your spouse. Listen, I know that marriage can be rough, but it can be insanely rewarding with the right person. Don't give up, and don't just jump into a divorce. Try to work things out. Have those painful conversations. Get therapy. Go on long vacations. Rediscover each other. Try to bring the romance back. And if you do decide to get a divorce, do it the right way. Not just for you, but because you don't want to get financially train wrecked by this. You don't want to commit some crime you didn't even know the law existed. You want to make sure that you come out of this off the other side squeaky clean and happy. Now, from the bottom of my heart, I hope you find peace and happiness. There's someone out there that will love you. I believe in that, and I hope you find them.